Now that we've talked about all the different factoring methods, it might be important to go over just a summary of what factoring methods to use when. So far, when we've been factoring, you've been knowing which method to use, likely because of the sections that we were in were based on the factoring method we were going to use. More practically, though, as you move through the course, you'll have all the different factoring methods show up, and you have to know how to approach each one based on what you see. So the first thing when you're factoring, all right, is to factor out the GCF, the greatest common factor, and I'll just say if one exists. All right, so the first thing you always look for when you're factoring is a GCF. If there is a GCF other than one, you factor it out to the front. If there isn't one, then you'll proceed. So the second step, after you factor the GCF out to the front, you're going to look at what's left inside the parentheses. And what you really should be asking yourself is, how many terms do you see? All right, so how many terms? Now, if inside the parentheses we have 2 terms, right, you should be checking for some very specific things. You're either going to check for the difference of perfect squares, right? So difference means subtraction of perfect squares. We're going to use our difference of perfect squares formula there. Or the sum or difference of perfect cubes. So if you have 2 terms, you should be checking to see if it's either of these inside the parentheses. Again, we have a formula for the sum or difference of perfect cubes. Make sure you use the formula. If it doesn't fit in either of those criteria, and you've already factored out the GCF, you can't factor it any further. If there was no GCF and you have 2 terms and it doesn't fit into one of those criteria, then it wouldn't be factorable. If you have 3 terms, alright, so if we have 3 terms, what you really should be asking yourself is, do you see a coefficient in front? So normally you'll see something like ax squared plus bx plus c in the expression, where a, b, and c are real number coefficients. And we really should say to yourself, does a equal 1? In other words, if a equals 1, you won't see anything in front of x squared. So you might see, do you see anything in front of x squared? Well, if you don't see anything in front of x squared, in other words, if a equals 1 when you're working through the problem, then you could make 2 sets of parentheses right away, and by reverse FOIL, x times x gives you the x squared, so you start with x there. X times x for each of them, and you'd have to figure out what multiplies to c and adds to b. If a is something other than 1, then you have a different value here. You could still use reverse FOIL or AC method, right? So this would be reverse FOIL or the AC method. Remember, AC method is a rewrite method, right? It's a rewrite method where you rewrite the middle term, and then you'll have 4 terms. Right? If you use reverse FOIL, you'll set 2 sets of parentheses, but the coefficients of the x's won't just be x and x, and you can't just say what multiplies a c and adds a b. You would have to actually do a trial and error. So when I say reverse FOIL, this is a trial and error. Now you can use either one of these. Either is okay. Many students prefer AC method because it's a procedure you can do over and over again. But if you prefer to reverse FOIL, sometimes that's a little faster depending on what the factors of A and the factors of C are. And then lastly, if you have 4 terms, which is what would happen when you do an AC method, you rewrite the middle term, so it would give you 4 terms. When you have 4 terms, that's when you should try to use factor by grouping. Remember, factor by grouping, you have 2 groups of 2. Each having a GCF, you factor the GCF out from each group, and then you hope that you have a common factor, or greatest common factor, left between the 2 terms that remain. So this is just to give you an idea of how you should be thinking about it. If you're looking at this in my online course, there is supplements that have a factoring summary that's written out, in a printed document, as well as a practice sheet that has all different types of expressions on the same page, where you might have to figure out, which method to use, based on deducting how many terms you have, and then which method from there. So hopefully this helps.